lot of veterans, including myself, who've given much thought to this thing with the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier. It's now fired commander, the acting Secretary of the Navy, and the resulting media aftermath that now has the acting secretary first apologizing and now resigning because he told the captain's crew the guy was either too, and I quote, naive or stupid, unquote, to command an aircraft carrier. And now President Trump publicly musing that he may get involved because he doesn't want to see the guy's career destroyed. A lot of folks' initial takes tend to go something like one of these paths. First, the acting Navy Secretary was right to fire this guy because he leaked his letter to the press and sent it to 20 people instead of his chain of command. Or second, what the heck is a Washington, D.C. bureaucrat doing firing a commander who is on the ground on the other side of the world trying to take care of his 5,000 crew members in the middle of a pandemic? Or third, it's possible that both Captain Crozier and the Navy made the right moves by writing and leaking the letter and by firing him for it, respectively. Finally, a lot of folks seem to be overlaying politics into this, and some of those opinions seem to be breaking along party lines. That stuff needs to stop immediately. Acting Secretary Moodley is a Trump appointee, and I would expect nothing less from any appointee in the Obama or other administrations. As others have pointed out, senior commanders have been relieved for far less egregious behavior. The military is designed to be apolitical. We have to keep it that way, and we who have been and are part of the United States Armed Forces must insist that others do as well. My guest today is One America News Network's Jack Posobiec, Navy veteran, China expert, and former intelligence officer. Jack was one of the first to break the story on social media and has been following it closely. Jack Posobiec of One America News Network, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Jack. I know that you and I have been following closely this issue with the USS Theodore Roosevelt captain, Crozier,
Yes.
and his letter, which I have a copy of. It was a very well done letter. It wasn't one of those rant type things. It was staffed. It was obvious that there was no classified information into it and those kind of things. But we got some breaking news, so let's just start at the top. Acting Secretary of the Navy Moodley, I keep wanting to say Moldy, Moodley resigned
Right.
before we came on the air, and I just wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, at One American News, we actually just reported as well that the recommendation for his resignation came at the behest of the Chief of Naval Operations, so the top officer of the U.S. military, Admiral Gilday, and then also Admiral Gilday, and then also Vice President Pence said that he signed off on it, on the resignation. They brought it to the president, and it proceeded forward with his blessing. He said that essentially what we're hearing out of the White House now is that they felt that the entire situation had been mishandled. It had turned into too much of a PR crisis, especially while the nation is in the midst of a national crisis like this. And they decided that one of the best things they should do is, look, this guy was an acting secretary. He wasn't even a full secretary. So to simply ask for his resignation at that point. And look, you really have to question what the Secretary of the Navy's judgment was here, because I'm sympathetic to people pointing out that, a commanding officer shouldn't be leaking. Now, there hasn't been an investigation yet that's proven that, but obviously that's not something that generally you want commanding officers to do. That being said, the Secretary of the Navy then decided to double down by flying half a world away to an aircraft carrier. And instead of rebuilding the trust, because clearly there was a trust issue there between those 5,000 sailors and the Navy broadly, or even the military broadly, if you think of it that way. They felt that their needs about being in harm's way were not being met, right? That was really the impetus behind that letter in the first place. The fact that, hey, there's an outbreak going on that ship. And I've even been hearing through the Navy grapevine, I'm a former Navy officer myself, that this outbreak is a lot bigger than, you know, the 100 or so numbers that we're seeing. And actually the fact that Captain Crozier himself also tested positive, I think speaks to that, the fact that there was a larger situation going on than has been previously reported. Also, we know that there's been testing issues, not only in the military, but throughout the country, that we just don't really have good numbers on this thing where it is, we're not really able to track and trace it like we wanted to be able to. So
we don't have good numbers on it. I've got an enlisted son in the Air Force that
yeah.
he and his wife both have been exposed. His wife was sick a couple of weeks ago when all this first started, and had 2 of the 3 main symptoms, and they wouldn't test them. They sent them home to go in quarantine, and they still haven't been tested.
Right. And so a lot of the issue is that these tests, because they're so limited, at least the tests that we think are credible. So the people that are only getting them, some of the stuff that I'm seeing is that if you're at the level of needing to require hospitalization, then you're given the test. But prior to that, you can't get a test. So if you can't get a test, how do we know how many people have this thing and how, you know, et cetera? So the issue is that, okay, there was an issue between the Secretary of the Navy losing trust with the commanding officer, but there was also that separate issue of the sailors losing their trust with the Navy. I mean, you even had people saying they weren't sure if they wanted to re-enlist. They weren't sure why they should put their lives on the line for an organization that didn't seem to be taking their concerns, their lives, as importantly as they should, taking it for granted in some cases. Obviously, you're going to have family members, wives, husbands, moms, dads, etc., clearly worried about what's going on with these 5,000 American lives. And so the Secretary of the Navy could have gone to Guam and worked to rebuild that trust. He could have given a speech that said, look, I understand that you guys loved your commanding officer, and I respect that, but we have a process that we have to follow, and we're going to follow that, but I'm here to make sure that everything's taken care of. Hoo-yah. Right? He could have just said that.
Yeah. That's my point. But let's address the crowd for a second, Jack. That's like, he leaked the memo and all that. He should have never done that and went outside of his chain of command. Is there any evidence that you have that he went outside of his chain of command, or did he send it to his chain of command and copied some staff agencies?
I'm not really sure, to be honest, because the evidence that we have on this is so scant that we only know that he CC'd it to supposedly 20 or 30. We can't even get a regular number on that, people who had this letter. And then we were told that, oh, well, it leaked to his hometown paper. Well, his hometown is San Francisco, right? So, I mean, there's quite a few Navy officers from San Francisco that have been out there. I don't exactly think that's the kind of evidence that would hold up in a court, even a court martial. So if we're going to be removing COs, I'd like to see the standard of evidence be a little bit higher than just, oh, well, we think that he may have leaked it.
Yeah, so would I. And like you, I give the benefit of the doubt to everybody in the chain that's involved in this, including Mobley, that their intentions are on behalf of the American people, and they don't have nefarious intentions from what I could tell. But you know, then the second big reaction is, what the heck is a bureaucrat in a suit and tie doing firing a commander out on the ground? That's kind of where I fell out on this, because I was
right. And so one of the bigger issues that I think that the Secretary of the Navy wasn't taking into consideration is the fact that this was done not just on a national stage, but on a world stage. Obviously, our aircraft carriers are one of our most visible assets, our military assets around the world in terms of force protection, in terms of national identity for the American government, American sovereignty writ large, right? They represent us as a people. It's one of our most expensive military assets, right? A single one of these things is like, what, $4.5 billion or something. That's even without the air wing. And so the Chinese, right, are looking at us very closely, not just because this is one of the 2 carriers that are in their area of operations in the Western Pacific there, but also because, think about it, what was America's biggest criticism of China? What has America's biggest criticism of China been throughout this? Well, we could point to the fact that early on in this coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan, that China had arrested, detained, and incriminated 8 doctors for blowing the whistle on the outbreak. And so we were really giving it to them because saying that they covered it up, they covered up information. Well, now, if you've got some bureaucrat in Washington right? Relieving someone of command for essentially what looks like blowing the whistle. Again, we don't have all the details, but it looks like he was blowing the whistle in terms of trying to get better conditions for his people. Now the Chinese, you've offered them a complete propaganda coup, because they can turn around to their people and they can go to other countries of the world and say, see, the United States is just as bad as us.
Exactly right, Jack. I mean, that's one of the concerns that we shared with each other just yesterday, is that Modley himself gave the propaganda ammunition to the Chinese government and the Communist Party there to be able to attack us with it. And that's exactly what happened. They hadn't really said that much up until this point. And this was not an unknown event. I mean, the acting secretary himself had been on the radio and news shows for 3 days prior to this, talking about the Roosevelt and how it was put into port, and they were testing the crew because they had some positives, right?
That's right. The Secretary of the Navy himself, and I think there's been a lot of obfuscation on this point, that he himself is the one that initially allowed the condition of the carrier to be known. I mean, look, everybody knew that the carrier wasn't scheduled to come into Guam. Operational security is what it is, but you can't exactly hide when an aircraft carrier pulls into port. There's 5,000 sailors that appear out of nowhere in a giant ship. I mean, Guam is not that big, so any of the Chinese intelligence assets, which there are on Guam, there are Chinese intelligence assets there. I've deployed there in various capacities with the intelligence community, and they would easily be able to say what was going on there. And so the Secretary of the Navy was the one who put that information out himself, that it was going on. Obviously, the company line has been to downplay it, talk about readiness, say this thing can go into fight. And by the way, I'm sure that the aircraft carrier, if called to do so, would be able to get into the fight right now. And I do believe that the sailors would do so if we were put into that kind of position. The Navy is always ready to go to war, right? Ready to fight tonight. That's actually one of the slogans of Indo-Pacific Command these days. And so what really could have been done here is a situation where, and they could have simply said, look, we're going to bring this Captain Crozier up. We're going to appoint, reassign him to, maybe like a Navy-wide task force to examine COVID and the fleet response to it, and just left it at that. And then kept all of the investigation, kept everything in-house, so it would have prevented this major PR, news media, outside of the house, global scandal from even starting in the first place if they had just handled it differently.
Yeah, and you know why I'm not surprised that the acting secretary resigned is that there were no uniforms between him, the guy in the suit and tie in Washington, D.C., and the firing of a tactical commander of a major aircraft carrier in the United States Navy. I think that's a lesson to be learned for any future secretaries of military departments, don't you?
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, look, we have 12 aircraft carriers currently in the United States Navy inventory. And at any given point in time, maybe 3 or 4 or 4 deployed. You've got others that are out on patrol. But all the 06s in the Navy are constantly competing to get one of those billets as the commanding officer. There's only so many of them, right? And those are chosen by the admirals. And so that this guy, Crozier, had the endorsement and the support of a sizable number of the Admiral Corps of the Navy to be given that position, right? That's who makes these decisions. Mm-hmm. And so for the Secretary of the Navy to just very quickly relieve him of command and not have any other uniforms involved in that also shows to me that he probably didn't do a lot of consultation with the Admiral Corps before he took that action.
Yeah, I suspected as much. And again,
little military politics there for everybody.
Yeah. As General Eisenhower said when he was accused of not being a politician or experienced in politics when he was running for president, he goes, I became a 5-star general. What do you expect? What do you think I am?
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah. And the fact that the Admiral, folks that aren't familiar with a carrier battle group, the Admiral supervisor of this U.S. Navy captain, who is the commander of the carrier and the air wing on the carrier, and what it does, his boss is like one door down the passageway, to use a Navy term there, and I guarantee you that he was not blindsided by the email because it was addressed to him the way I understand it.
No, this is obviously something where we could speculate, but bottom line is, for everybody out there, there's a lot more to this story. In fact, I think there's probably more than just two sides to the story. I think there's various sides to this story from all the different commands that are involved in this. Just to throw one out there, that the idea that the captain is the one who chose to pull into Vietnam on his own, as if 106 can make that sort of decision for an entire battle group to conduct a port of call in Vietnam, by the way, which is not an adversary, but not exactly one of our closest allies either. It's obviously a high visibility port visit. And so the idea that was a decision that was made by one person is kind of ludicrous on its face.
Especially a U.S. Navy captain, which is an 06. That's what I was when I retired. I competed for command at the 06 level and was able to become one. And I've commanded a bomber squadron too. And you wouldn't even take one B-1 bomber into a place like Egypt or anywhere without several stars approving it.
Well, you could fly them wherever you wanted, right?
Yeah, and the State Department approving it.
Exactly.
I mean, I took a 2-ship formation over the island of Japan, directly over Tokyo, and we had to have State Department and several flag officers approve.
Oh yeah.
Because the Japanese were not happy that U.S. bombers were coming over their capital city for the first time in many years.
Little bit of history there, obviously.
Yeah. So, well, I appreciate you coming on, Jack, and I'm sure there's more to the story, and that's why I'm so pleased to get you as a guest here, so you could speak to that because of your experience in the Navy as an intelligence officer. You are a China expert. And I appreciate the work you do. All of my audience does, I know. And we look forward to having you back on. And please stay safe, take care of your family, and we will get through this and are getting through it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we're beating this thing, and we're going to beat this thing. Appreciate it always.
Absolutely. God bless you.